During my recent trip to India, I was impressed by the vibrancy of civil society. They play a key role in upholding India's democratic traditions and the rights of minorities. It is important for civic space to be vigorously defended and for civil society to be able to do their work without hindrance. In Pakistan, lawyers and human rights defenders have been jailed for crucial social media posts. In Georgia, I regret the restrictions on civic space. In Venezuela, I note the release of some people who were arbitrarily detained and urge the release of the remainder. The state of the emergency should be reviewed to ensure it respects civic space and human rights. Civil society and victims groups must also be able to participate meaningfully in public affairs. I will provide an update on the situation on the 16th of March. Authoritarians around the world follow a familiar playbook. Governments adopt vague laws under the guise of national security, criminalize peaceful criticism, and use heavy-handed tactics to respond to dissent. They control information by capturing some channels for propaganda while shutting down or censoring others. Human rights defenders, independent media, and dissenting voices are arrested, threatened, subjected to surveillance, and even killed. Civil society groups are branded as the agents of foreign powers, and their funding is cut. The authoritarian undermines judicial institutions by co-opting, overriding, or abolishing them. And all the while, women and minority groups, migrants, LGBTIQ+ people, religious minorities are scapegoated and blamed for all of society's ills. We see this playbook used in many countries today. Mr. President, several countries are militarizing their law enforcement operation. Across the Sahel, human rights defenders and journalists are arbitrarily arrested and detained, independent media banned, and political parties dissolved as part of a militarized response to violent extremism. I am concerned about the 4-year state of emergency in El Salvador and the use of mass trials. Efforts against organized crime need to be undertaken in line with due process. I'm also troubled by reports of high numbers of deaths in custody. Likewise, in Ecuador, very concerned about reports of hundreds of deaths in prison, both from violence and from disease. In the United States, immigration and other agents have used excessive force during large-scale operations against migrants and peaceful protesters, and have shot and killed several people during these operations. Authorities in Cameroon and Uganda used excessive force, detained political opponents and critics, and imposed severe restrictions on civic space before, during, and after elections. In a welcome development, Tanzania established a national commission to investigate violations that took place around the elections in October. Elections in Guinea last December marked the transition to the restoration of a constitutional order. However, serious violations persist, including restricted civic space, enforced disappearances, and digital shutdowns. Mr. President, in Colombia, where my office documented 32 killings of political leaders in 2025, I am troubled by the security situation in the run-up to elections scheduled for May. In Peru, I am concerned about attacks on judicial independence and measures undermining the separation of powers ahead of elections later this year. I encourage the authorities in Colombia and Peru, as well as in Benin, Ethiopia and Nepal, to uphold human rights and safeguard civic space in upcoming election processes. I welcome the peaceful conduct of the recent elections in Bangladesh and its transition process. I look forward to engaging with the new government to support institutional reform, accountability and healing that needs to include all of society. In Madagascar and Nepal, I urge all stakeholders to commit to genuine reforms that respond to the aspirations of Gen Z protesters last year. Mr. President, outside electoral periods and across all regions, governments are tightening restrictions on civic space. The authorities in Belarus, Egypt, India, the Russian Federation, Tunisia, Turkey and beyond continue to prosecute civil society activists under counter-terrorism legislation. In Pakistan, lawyers and human rights defenders have been jailed for crucial social media posts. In Georgia, I regret the restrictions on civic space. In Venezuela, I note the release of some people who were arbitrarily detained and urge the release of the remainder. The state of the emergency should be reviewed to ensure it respects civic space and human rights. Civil society and victims groups must also be able to participate meaningfully in public affairs. I will provide an update on the situation on the 16th of March. In China, I urge the authorities to stop using vague criminal, administrative and national security provisions to suppress the peaceful exercise of fundamental rights. I urge them to release all those arbitrarily detained. I regret the lack of follow-up by the authorities on previous recommendations and an accountability to protect the rights of Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities in Xinjiang and of Tibetans in their regions. This includes labor issues and religious and cultural freedoms. I'm also concerned by the intensified repression of Protestant communities. In Sri Lanka, I urge the government to repeal the Prevention of Terrorism Act and to work with civil society to ensure that new legislation complies with human rights law. During my recent trip to India, I was impressed by the vibrancy of civil society. They play a key role in upholding India's democratic traditions and the rights of minorities. It is important for civic space to be vigorously defended and for civil society to be able to do their work without hindrance. Globally, attacks on free and independent media are alarming. Over the past 3.5 years, 310 journalists were killed, and 85% of these killings were unpunished. Journalists are detained, threatened, and subjected to surveillance for investigating corruption and organized crime. Women journalists are particularly exposed to violence and abuse online. Mr. President, attacks on minorities are continuing as some states retreat from their commitments to prevent and address discrimination. Africans and people of African descent are subjected to racial profiling and excessive use of force across several regions. I have consistently condemned the impunity that persists. I call for full accountability, which is key to combating systemic racism in law enforcement and to restoring trust. Indigenous peoples continue to be denied their rights to land and to free, prior, and informed consent in mining and other commercial projects. Other groups face discrimination on the basis of their work or their descent. I'm alarmed by reports showing a sharp increase in anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and other forms of religious hate across several regions. The rise of hate speech against migrants and refugees, including in Europe, Libya, the United States of America, is a deeply worrying trend. In the European Union, proposed new rules on returns of migrants risk further restricting their access to healthcare and education and expanding the use of detention. I'm very concerned that some European states are putting political pressure on the European Court of Human Rights around migration issues. I urge states to address the exclusion and discrimination against Roma across Europe. People and organizations working to defend LGBTIQ+ rights have been targeted in Hungary and Turkey and beyond, which is a worrying trend. Mr. President, women and girls are facing intensifying threats to their rights. In Afghanistan, as I briefed this Council yesterday, the system of segregation imposed on women is reminiscent of apartheid, based on gender rather than race. Both the Pellicot case and the Epstein files show the extent of the exploitation and abuse of women and girls. Does anyone think there are not many more men like Dominique Pellicot or Jeffrey Epstein? Such horrific abuse is enabled by social systems that silence women and girls and insulate powerful men from accountability. States must investigate all alleged crimes, protect survivors, and ensure justice without fear or favor. More broadly, violence against women, including femicide, is a global emergency. Around 50,000 women and girls worldwide were killed in 2024, most by family members. I'm also deeply concerned by the growing number of attacks, including online, against women in public life. Every woman politician I meet tells me they face constant misogyny and online hate. Mr. President, on a positive note, I'm pleased to have signed a host country agreement this week with the government of Mozambique.